In this talk, the fifth in the series, I want to look at the social impact of the Titanic disaster, focusing obviously on Dundee. The Wizard of the North was a magazine published from this site in Whitehall Street by William Kidd and Sons. It was a light-hearted publication with a byline of wisdom, wit and humour. However, the editorial of May 1912 had a more serious tone. It ran, "The only subject one hears about at present is the terrible disaster to the Titanic. It has cast quite a gloom over the whole country, and other subjects are barely mentioned." This statement sums up the feelings of people in Great Britain and worldwide. It evoked theatrical demonstrations and fundraising efforts countrywide. Religious leaders used it to make a judgment on the modern society, as seen in 1912, and this conviction that technology can overcome all, including God himself. The Bishop of Winchester, Edward Stuart Talbot, described the sinking as a monument to human presumption. Even in Dundee, with no direct connection to Titanic, each of these scenarios was played out. As soon as 5 days after the sinking, on the 20th of April 1912, the Reverend Henry Williamson gave a lecture entitled "The Titanic, What About the Drowned?" This talk was given at the Unitarian Church, Constitution Road, Dundee at 6:15 p.m. His lecture was repeated on the 27th of April. On the morning of the 20th of April 1912, the Reverend William Hamilton, M.A., gave a lecture entitled "The Titanic" in Trinity Church, Crescent Street, Dundee. On the 27th of April 1912, at the Gilfillan Memorial Church, Whitehall, Crescent, Dundee, the councillor, the Reverend Walter Walsh D.D., gave a lecture entitled "The Titanic Tragedy" at 6:30 p.m. There were many other lectures and sermons at that time using Titanic sinking as a moral tale for the age. However, over 20 years later, on the 19th of August 1933, Mr. and Mrs. Seth Sykes, self-styled evangelists, composers and musicians, gave a talk entitled "The Sinking of the Titanic" at 7:30 p.m. at the Baptist Church, Maxwelltown, Dundee. The talk was illustrated by over 200 slides and was delivered 6 times over the following days and reprised on the 14th of April 1934 in the Railway Mission in Taylor's Lane, Dundee. On the 10th of December 1938, a lantern lecture on the Titanic sinking was given in the Dundee Tent Mission in Peter Street at 7:30 p.m. The spiritual lessons to be learned from the tragedy seem to be many and time insensitive. It's hard to imagine a single tragedy, with perhaps the exception of the Twin Towers disaster in 2001, that impinged itself so deeply on the human consciousness, particularly as it was well before 24-hour news coverage, social media, etc. Apart from the religious and moral aspect of the tragedy, there was the drama surrounding the incident that the public were anxious to engage with. On the 25th of April, the Electric Theatre at 122 Nethergate, Dundee, included in its programme a feature entitled "Titanic Leaving Belfast." This may be the same footage made by an unknown production company in 1912 and called "Titanic Leaving Belfast Lock for Southampton." The title is somewhat misleading, as the footage was shot at the Harland and Wolff shipyard on the 3rd of February 1912 and shows the Titanic entering the Thomson Graving Dock in Belfast prior to final modifications, such as enclosing the forward A-deck. Note, the video of Titanic leaving Belfast Lock can be seen on YouTube. It is reckoned that at least 5 films were made of Titanic, above water as it were, but only the one mentioned above survives. The other 4 Titanic films listed on the slide have all been lost. There's a lot of film footage claiming to be Titanic, but it is usually of its sister ship Olympic, or less often other vessels. These are in wide circulation from the time of the disaster and took the form of some silent dramatic sequences interspersed by stock footage of icebergs, RMS Olympic and Captain Edward Smith. It is possible the Electric Theatre was showing one of the lost films. On the 8th of May 1912, the Electric Palace at 160 Nethergate by the Queen's Hotel was showing, in addition to our usual splendid programme, the Titanic on her first and last voyage, icebergs in the Atlantic. The palace opened in 1909 and was run by BB Pictures, formed by James Joseph Bennell and named in honour of his wife and lifelong devoted helpmate Blanche Bennell. I've not been able to establish what the Titanic feature shown at the Electric Palace entailed, but it could have been one of the features mentioned above, or other footage from Southampton, Cherbourg or Queenstown, all of which are now lost. There may also have been footage of other vessels and icebergs to add to the dramatic effect. A lot more footage of Titanic might have been available, including its construction and launch, because this man, Charles Urban, a filmmaker, was interested in filming both Olympic and Titanic as they were built. Harland and Wolff had no objection, but in the event, Olympic was filmed and Titanic was not. Whether this was the decision of Harland and Wolff or Mr. Urban is not known. Following the sinking of the Titanic, it is reasonable to suppose that Mr. Urban was disappointed as he had, in commercial terms, filmed the wrong ship. The third ship in the Olympic class, Britannic, was also filmed during construction, and after it had sunk in the Aegean Sea in 1916, the newsreel companies dusted off copies of their film as it was now in demand. The demand would have been on a different scale of magnitude for Titanic. On the 20th of May 1912, the following notice appeared in the Dundee Courier. This was the animated weekly newsreel film of the Titanic disaster. The animated weekly was an American-based newsreel company. It claimed to get the news wherever and whenever it happened. Their aggressive approach to news gathering was demonstrated by the fact that they chartered tugs to send reporters to the sinking site of the Titanic rather than waiting for news to come to them. However, the men heading for the wreck site were overtaken by wireless news from New York that Carpathia had taken on board the Titanic survivors, and the Titanic itself was on the bottom of the ocean. The reporters diverted to intercept the Carpathia, and many views of the rescue ship were taken. Another cameraman at Halifax in Nova Scotia took pictures of the cable-laying ship the Mackay Bennett as she left port loaded with coffins and embalming capability to recover dead bodies from Titanic wreck site. How many tugs set off to intercept the Carpathia is unknown. Hearst newspaper certainly chartered some, and on one of these tugs, the Mary Scully, was a man called Jack Binns. He had been the wireless operator on board the White Star liner RMS Republic, which sank off the island of Nantucket, Massachusetts after colliding with the Lloyd Italiano liner SS Florida on the 23rd of January 1909. To alert the authorities to the incident, Jack Binns was reputedly the first person to send a wireless CQD message, that is a distress call, on the new Marconi system. Jack Binns had just started in the newspaper business and may have been working for the New York American, who reportedly chartered the Mary Scully. However, it appeared that the plan was to arrange for Mr. Binns to take over from Harold Cottam, the wireless operator on Carpathia, who was exhausted after 2 days' almost continuous work. Mr. Binns was accompanied by another wireless operator and a semaphore signalman. The outcome of their encounter with Carpathia is unclear. One report said fog made contact impossible. No one could see the semaphore and the wireless was constantly busy. Another report states that Mr. Binns reached Carpathia by wireless and the newsreel cameraman obtained shots of the survivors. Whatever the truth, the animated weekly managed to film Carpathia, as the newsreel includes a shot of the rescue ship, which bore 703 survivors, the number used in the publicity material. The Carpathia footage was edited together with other appropriate Titanic footage to make up a special issue of the animated weekly newsreel. This was first shown on Sunday the 21st of April 1912 at Weber's Theatre on Broadway, New York. On April 24th, a copy of the film was dispatched on the Mauretania, and when the ship docked at Fishgarden, Wales, the film was taken by train to London and released in Britain in early May 1912. It was shown in Dundee from the 20th of May, as noted above, at the Electric Theatre, Nethergate. The notice for the production in the trade journals proclaimed that once again the cinematograph has a solemn duty to perform in recording incidents in connection with the greatest shipping disaster the world has ever known. The production comprised 18 scenes, which are itemised in the book Dundee Man Lost at Sea. However, in the rush to complete these Titanic productions, authenticity was often sacrificed. In the first of the 18 scenes of the animated weekly's newsreel entitled Captain Smith on the Bridge, it would be reasonably assumed by the audience to be the bridge of Titanic. However, it was taken on the bridge of Olympic the previous summer. A Mr. Welch of the Gowman Company wrote a letter to the Cinematographic Weekly admitting to the mistake. Whether cinema goers in Dundee appreciated or cared about these misleading scenes is a very debatable point. The issue of falsification in different Titanic films was fully dealt with in Stephen Bottomore's book The Titanic and Silent Cinema. The next theatrical representation of the sinking of the Titanic was given at the King's Theatre and Hippodrome, situated in Cowgate, a site now occupied by the Deja Vu nightclub. When the King's Theatre opened on the 15th of March 1909, it had a very opulent interior set on 3 levels, stalls, dress circle, and a balcony with boxes on each side of the stage. It was very admired in its day. The Titanic presentation took place on the 30th of September 1912. The notice for the show in the Courier ran as seen on this slide. Who could resist attending such a production? The 8 tableaux are listed in the book Dundee Man Lost at Sea. A Myriorama was a moving panorama and was one of the most popular forms of entertainment in the world in the mid-19th century. The effect was achieved by taking a long, continuous, painted canvas scene as shown here and rolling each end around 2 large spool-like mechanisms that could be turned, causing the canvas to scroll across the back of the stage, often behind a stationary scenic piece or object like a boat, horse or vehicle, to create the illusion of movement and travelling through space. There were hundreds of these moving panoramas constantly touring the United Kingdom and the United States. They were particularly used to create travelogues, the most famous of which was John Banvard's trip up the Mississippi. The shows were almost always narrated by a delineator or professor. Poole's Myriorama started as one of the first British all-year-round moving panorama shows run by Moses Gompertz, assisted by the Poole brothers Charles and George, here seen at a wedding of one of the brothers. The Poole brothers renamed their moving panorama a Myriorama, meaning many views, in the mid-1880s. This distinguished their show from its rivals. Although cinema eventually replaced the moving panorama, it remained popular until the late 1920s. It was considered a Christmas-time treat, much as going to a pantomime is regarded in the British Isles today. Poole's Myriorama revisited the King's Theatre Dundee in March 1914 for a reprise of its production, The Loss of the Titanic. From what has been discussed in this short talk, it can be appreciated that there was an intense interest for both moral and entertainment purposes in the Titanic story. This interest has continued right up to the present, with James Cameron's 1997 production of Titanic being the most recent and possibly the most realistic filming of the disaster as it unfolded. More details on all the subjects in the talk are available in the book Dundee Man Lost at Sea by Derek J. Byrne, available from Amazon and Kindle. Another talk will be available soon on YouTube. Thank you.